Welcome to the Virtual Sangha podcast from virtualsangha.org. Looking to learn more about Buddhism and connect with friends on the path? Or maybe you're an experienced practitioner and you enjoy keeping a beginner's mind. Wherever you're at in your journey, you're invited to visit virtualsangha.org to browse our resources there and connect with our supportive and inclusive community on Discord. Find the link in the show notes for more information. And now, on with the show.
I take refuge in the Buddha, the one who shows me the way in this life. Buddham Saranam Gacchami. I take refuge in the Dharma, the way of understanding and of love. Dhammam Saranam Gacchami. I take refuge in the Sangha, the community that lives in harmony and awareness. Sangham Saranam Gacchami. Homage to the Blessed One, the Exalted One, the fully enlightened Lord Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Okay, everyone, thank you for joining me for this week's book club. We are discussing Anuruddha. So, there are a lot of topics that come up in this chapter with Anuruddha, from psychic powers to a monk's conduct in relation to women, and the complex family tree of all of the disciples, and especially those in the Sakyan clan. But we're going to start with the story of Anuruddha and the Natipuva cake. So Anuruddha was born into the Sakyan nobility and was raised with incredible luxury. He had a different palace for each season, and he was so pampered and provided for that he had never been told no, and had never been told that there isn't any of anything. Nothing that he had ever wanted had run out, apparently. And there are two things that um, came up for me as reading this. One is how identical this is to the conditions that Shakyamuni was raised with, that the person who would become the Buddha was also raised in luxury. Sakyan nobility had a different palace for each season. So a lot of the descriptions of Anuruddha's childhood were copied and pasted from Siddhartha Gautama's childhood. So part of the story is that Anuruddha is playing a game with some of his friends, and they are gambling with cakes, with treats, like we might do after Halloween when we've got a bunch of candy and we're playing games, and the candy is the currency of our wagers. So he's on quite a losing streak, and maybe this is just an excuse to get more and more cake sent to his party. And he keeps requesting cake, and his mother keeps sending cake until they run out. And she replies, "There isn't any." And the phrase for "there isn't any" is Natipuva. And having never heard this before, Anuruddha believes that this must be a new flavor of cake. So we're all going to enjoy Natipuva cake. So he sends a message, yes, please send me some of that natipuva cake if that's all we have. And his mother thinks that this is a funny game, so maybe like a cute joke. So she decides to turn it into a lesson and sends an empty platter, a plate with no cakes on it. But the story says that because of Anuruddha's merit accumulated through past lives, the gods fill the platter with cake. So there are these heavenly cakes that magically appear on the plate by the time it gets to Anuruddha. This is the other thing that stands out to me is how much this reminds me of some of the stories from outside of Buddhism, especially if you get into the Krishna Leelas, the stories of Krishna as a child. It sounds like one of those kinds of things. But coming back to Anuruddha, he enjoys the cakes and he doesn't question where they came from. Something that was not explicitly mentioned in this book, but that I took away from it is that Anuruddha is extremely naive. He's been so sheltered and pampered that he doesn't understand scarcity. And I f I feel like, uh, Anuruddha's naivete could be something that we could, use to interpret a whole lot of his story. So, when, part of Anuruddha's story when it comes to how did he approach becoming a monastic. So he's living in this luxury, and basically one day he's confronted with the idea of work. He's confronted with the idea of menial labor and holding a 9 to 5 job basically. And that's something that he's so naive he doesn't understand. And he's being told about everything that goes into managing the estate that he has benefited from his whole life and all of the work that has to be done in each season year after year. And he says, when is it done? When is the work done? And the answer is never. Now you have to be extremely naive to ask that kind of a question. So that naive innocence that was illustrated with the cake story sets us up for us to actually believe that somebody could really be confronted with the idea of having a job and not understanding that work is just part of the human experience and part of the human condition, and that he could be shocked by being told that it doesn't end. There's there are some things there that we could reflect on, the endless tasks that we are confronted with on a daily basis and how do we feel about them. I think for Anuruddha, part of what's being illustrated is a sense of pointlessness of the tasks because his decision to renounce to give up all of these luxuries isn't just an escape from the responsibilities of work because the monastic training is itself a lot of work. It's not just oh, we're going to go just sit by a riverbank and chill out for the rest of our lives. He's going to be doing a lot of travel. He's going to be doing a lot of walking and alms rounds and chores basically, um, with his fellow monastics. And The idea that this is an escape from work doesn't really hold consistent to the Anuruddha that we see later when he is a monastic. And there is a sutta later where we see Anuruddha doing chores with his fellow monastics. It's about the meaninglessness of what he's experiencing. He's seeing that these luxuries are, he's starting to become aware of their limitations, and the work that goes into them is never ending, so it's not really gratifying, and this is where dukkha comes in. So the meaninglessness, the pointlessness of it is something that is a difference between the work that goes into maintaining a bunch of luxuries that never last versus the work that goes into the spiritual life. So, an example of this is referenced in the chapter that we just read, and I'm going to go ahead and read the original sutta a little bit right now. So, this is Majjhima Nikaya 31, the discourse at Gosinga. In this discourse, the Buddha is coming to a grove, a forest park, where a handful of monastics, a handful of monks, Anuruddha, and two of his friends on the path, Nandaya and Kimbila, are practicing together in seclusion out in the woods. So the Buddha is entering the forest, and Anuruddha, Nandiya, and Kimbila come out to greet him. One received his bowl and robe, one spread out a seat, and one set out water for washing his feet. The Buddha sat on the seat spread out and washed his feet, and the venerables bowed and sat down to one side. The Buddha said to Anuruddha, I hope you are keeping well, Anuruddha. I hope you're all right. I hope you're having no trouble getting alms food. Anuruddha replies, we are keeping well, Blessed One. We're getting by, and we have no trouble getting alms food. The Buddha says, I hope you're living in harmony, appreciating each other without quarreling, blending like milk and water, and regarding each other with kindness. They reply, indeed, sir, we live in harmony like this. The Buddha says, but how do you live this way? Anuruddha says, in this case, sir, I think I am fortunate, so very fortunate to live together with spiritual companions such as these. I consistently treat these venerables with kindness by way of body, speech, and mind, both in public and in private. I think, why don't I set aside my own ideas and go along with these venerables' ideas? And that's what I do. Though we are different in body, sir, we are one in mind. The venerables Nandiya and Kimbila spoke likewise, and they added, that is how we live in harmony, appreciating each other without quarreling, blending like milk and water, and regarding each other with kindness. Good, good, Anuruddha, said the Buddha. But I hope you're living diligently, keen and resolute. Indeed, sir, we live diligently, they replied. But how do you live this way? Asked the Buddha. They said, in this case, sir, whoever returns first from an alms round prepares the seat and puts out the drinking water and takes out the garbage. If there's any left over, whoever returns eats the leftovers if they like. Otherwise, they throw it out where there's little that grows, or drop it in the water that has no living creatures. There were special rules about how to dispose of food. Then they put away the seats, the drinking water, the rubbish bin, and they sweep the floor. If someone sees that the pot of water for washing, drinking, or the toilet needs attending, they set it up. If he cannot do it on his own, he summons with a wave of a hand, and together they set it up by lending each other a hand to lift. But we don't even need to break into speech for that. And every 5 days we sit together for the whole night and discuss the teachings. That's how we live, diligently, keen, and resolute. So the sutta goes on to talk about what their practice is like together. And I love this sutta, and we've read it before for talking about how we can be good friends and companions to each other in the Sangha. But I just wanted to highlight that part where Anuruddha is talking about the joy in helping each other out with chores and not even needing to talk about it or argue about it or say, "Oh, I got the trash last time. Why aren't you getting the trash this time?" Or, anything like that. They just take care of each other, and if somebody needs help, they give help, and there are, no questions asked. So it's not that Anuruddha is lazy, but that his naivete was confronted with reality that made him question the purpose of everything that he was doing. And I feel like his uh, tendency to be naive did not go away when he became a monk. And there's some stories, especially about his interactions with women, that I feel like you can also read as a naive character. So he is uh, traveling and he comes to an inn, and there's this beautiful woman who's the innkeeper, and she tries to get Anuruddha to marry her. She wants to, put a ring on it. So she tries to tempt him, and she pulls out all the stops in trying to tempt him, and he does not respond at all. He's completely innocent. He's totally not interested in being distracted from his spiritual quest. And so his conduct is perfect. But it is because of his conduct that the Buddha then makes some additional rules about how monks should, for example, not share a room with a woman when they're traveling. And the Buddha is not blaming Anuruddha. He does not chastise Anuruddha or say that Anuruddha has demonstrated any moral failing or mental weakness or anything like that. The way it's described in the book is that the Buddha recognizes that Anuruddha was able to be in a high risk situation without being tempted, but other people are looking to Anuruddha for an example. And if people who are not as morally and mentally tough as Anuruddha go into that situation, then they could be tempted. They might run into some issues or have some unintended consequences. So, for example, that could just the rumor, for example, even if he didn't do anything behind closed doors, just the rumor that he might have done something could be damaging for the Sangha, and it could also be damaging for that innkeeper. It could hurt her reputation. So, out of protection of her reputation and the reputation of the Sangha, we have to have these rules that provide an abundance of precaution that Anuruddha did not appreciate the significance and the importance of it at that time. And that's also something that comes up sometimes in the virtual Sangha, is that somebody will ask for a feature to be added to the Discord server, or they'll ask permission to do a certain thing or something like that. And we have to think about, how is this potentially going to affect other people? And this one person who's asking it might be totally innocent and might have, the purest of motives, and maybe they could handle this thing perfectly fine. But we have to think about, how will it work for everybody else? How will it work if somebody comes in here and doesn't have the best of intentions? How will it work if somebody does have good intentions, but they lack the maturity or the experience to know how to handle these things properly? One of the examples, and I'm looking at my buddy Brandon in here, is the subject of debate, Dharma combat, debating and challenging each other's understandings and quote unquote Dharma combat is a really, really, really great thing. But I don't think we're ready for it as a community because we get people who come in just from the wild reaches of the internet, Reddit, whatever, and they don't know how to have a debate respectfully. And so the idea of be inviting other people to debate when they are maybe not ready for it um, is more poses more risk than benefit. And so maybe it's something that eventually we could have people apply. And I would love to have something set up on our website that is basically like an instructional course with demonstrations and examples and a quiz about how to conduct mindful debate, how to conduct quote unquote Dharma combat. And once people have taken that training and have read and agreed to that kind of conduct, then they can, engage with that. So that's just, that example of you might have the best of intentions, but we need to be mindful of how it's going to affect everyone else. Is something that the Buddha dealt with Anuruddha, and that we, in our very, very limited capacities relative to the Buddha, are dealing with in all of our little decisions that we make on a day-to-day basis. And so that's a good reminder for us as we practice and as we engage with others in the community is to remember maybe there's a lesson of non-self in here, that it's not about me and it's not really entirely about the other person, but everything we say in a public space and in the community has to have the public space and the community in mind, because everything we say and do is an example and influences how everybody else perceives and experiences the space and the shared practice. So that concludes my notes and reflections on this chapter. I love the reading of Anuruddha as someone who is f- from from his childhood to his practice before he becomes an arhat is someone who is naive, whether it's believing that there's these magically appearing divine cakes that show up and we'll just get cakes from heaven every time we play with our friends, to yeah, sure, I'll share a room with this beautiful innkeeper, what could possibly go wrong? um, so if anybody has any of their own thoughts or reflections, I'm going to take a break to enjoy a little mindful breathing before we share the merit. And if you'd like to share anything, please feel free to unmute your microphone and jump right in. Thank you.
Oh, please let me go first.
I see. All right. I've been summoned. So my thoughts, I mean, I guess I could give a summary of his life, but really I don't know if that's entirely beneficial. What at least a second time, shall we say. What really stuck out to me from my experience is how much Anuruddha seemed to deal with the celestial realms. I'm not sure if anybody else was struck by that, how often Anuruddha was dealing with gods, like all the time, it seemed like, from his childhood to, I mean, we can only assume to his last days. Of course, we don't know what happened before his death and whatnot, but we have to assume this was a constant thing for him. And it struck me because it seemed that for the rest of our cast of characters, these were intermittent, right? They didn't happen all the time, and when they did, they were poignant, shall we say. I mean, obviously, in the Buddhist case, he's the teacher of gods and men, therefore, he's always dealing with both. But for us, for arhants, maybe not. Um, and it also, I tend to tie things, in the Pali Canon to the tradition that I most, uh, I guess, directly cling to. And it's interesting, this scene after the Buddha died, this dealio where they couldn't carry on with the funeral preparations or the funeral rituals, because the devas wanted to do something different. And it's really interesting to me. Like we had to think about, they had to think about the wants of the devas before they're allowed to carry on with, you know, the devas weren't the sangha. I mean, right, the devas were there, but they weren't the monks. And yet we still have to appease them. We have to get along with them. And you can take a few ideas from this. You could take this the sort of environmentalist view that we have to be respectful of our environment if we want to have our practice be successful. Especially a thing in like the Bun tradition, right? We have to be in touch with nature, but also the non-material nature. We could spin it that way, right? The spirits and whatnot. Maybe we can't see them, and I know I come off as, and I'm that's not just that I come off, but I am a very skeptical person. You'll all know this if you see me talk in the server, uh, but it's uh it's remarkable to see these interactions between these guys in the Sangha, where some of them can see these devas, some of them can talk to them, some of them even have, spectral battles with these devas, and some have no interactions with devas, any kinds of spirits whatsoever. And yet they just sort of get on with it like, "Oh, that happened to you? You were in Sokka's palace and you had to answer 25 riddles to, convince him that you're right about something. Oh, that makes sense. I get it." Right? It's it's fascinating to me just how they deal with these things, how they view the world so differently than I, and I'm sure many other people, view the world now. Um but yeah, I just thought it was hard to miss this part of Anuruddha's life compared to the others we've seen so far. That is the end of my comments.
Um, I'll go ahead now, I guess, if Mike doesn't want to respond to Lemmy. If you do, Mike, then let me know. I'll just wait. I just had a question
No, go
about.
ahead. Absolutely.
Okay, I had a question about the part of the chapter where the Buddha was telling Anuruddha about the 11 imperfections that are faced in meditation. It's on page 183 of the chapter, which is 215 of the PDF I'm reading. Some of them I think are pretty, self-explanatory, like drowsiness or anxiety. But the one that I had trouble kind of understanding is the imperfection where it says concentrating intensely on the chosen object will lead to the 11th imperfection, which is the excessive meditating on these forms. So I just was kind of wondering, because obviously there's a lot of meditation in pretty much every school of Buddhism where you do concentrate on an object, either, say, visualizing a certain Buddha or Bodhisattva, or meditating on the body, or meditating on a concept. And so I just was sort of struggling to reconcile the idea of meditation, which is about concentrating on an object, without that crossing into sort of excessive meditating on a form.
Yeah, so Lemmy or anybody else who has some experience or insight with meditation, would anybody like to give some reflection or answer on what is that imperfection of excessive focus on the meditation on forms? What's the risk and the danger there, and the meaning of that imperfection?
At the risk of being a little sectarian, I guess it kind of depends on what tradition you cling to. I guess. I mean, obviously that therein is the problem, the clinging, right? And we even hear it, this obsession with it either existing or not existing, being real or not real. Um, I think perhaps I could be wrong here. The Buddha is saying like, yes, they're there. Acknowledge. Don't doubt yourself. Don't doubt yourself that they're there. This is a sign. We should expect to see these things. And I'm sure many of us who have meditated have seen the sort of moving lights behind the eyes, right? In the Dzogchen tradition, we have a different understanding than perhaps some others. Um, Yeah, right. Trying too hard and just let it pass. It's just one more thing that we will encounter in our meditation, right? We'll also, in the same way, we'll also probably encounter like a state of bliss or like extreme calm. And these are just more states that happen. They're not the point of meditation, they're not the end goal. They just happen. These are just things that our mind does, the lights, the calm, all that stuff.
Yeah, that not getting attached to the perceived phenomena of lights or anything that comes up as a sensation in meditation is definitely a good point. Another risk when it comes to focusing too much on the forms and the object of meditation is that you lose point of the intention. You lose awareness of the point and the intention. So like Vicky said, those kinds of sensations or even the objects of forms are traffic signs, right? So if you become obsessed with a form of meditation, you might really focus on cultivating the skill of conjuring that meditative experience at will quickly, and I can very quickly rest in this meditation, and I can go through these stages of meditation. Great, cool. And then you forget, like, why are you doing that? It's supposed to be something that helps you make progress. It's not supposed to be something that you become obsessed with and stay um, just fixated on that one object of meditation. You're supposed to be moving towards a goal, making progress in your practice. So, and of course, my Zen teachers of the past would probably be displeased with my description of meditation as something that you do for the sake of making progress or having a goal or anything like that, because so much of our Zen meditation is just being present and that's it. And it's not supposed to be something that has an arbitrary kind of effort to it. But that kind of goes with what Lemmy was saying about, different schools will have different interpretations. So since this is coming from the Pali Canon, this is coming from a school of thought of training where you have stages and you make effort to go through the stages. And I take it as saying, don't get too focused on being really excellent at this one stage. So hopefully that's helpful.
That's super helpful. Thank you both, and thanks to people in the chat. That's really helpful and clarifying.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Well, I'm just going to add, there are some traditions in which you're asked to do both and to recognize when you're doing either. So sometimes you are doing, you're advancing through the stages or you're meditating for a purpose. Sometimes you are just being, like when you're doing Dzogchen, you are just being, or Mahamudra, you're just being, you're within the Dharmakaya. Otherwise, you're, performing a practice to uh, eliminate your obscurations or cultivate devotion or purify past negative deeds. And it's up to you whether you feel this resonates with you. Because I mean, we're all so different. It would be pretty weird if we all did it in the exact same way.
All right, thank you everyone for the discussion and for joining me today. With that, I will wrap up and share the merit. Reciting the sutras, practicing the way of awareness, gives rise to benefits without limit. We vow to share the fruits with all beings. We vow to offer tribute to parents, teachers, friends, and numerous beings who give guidance and support along the path.